So we start in line 853. In fact, we start in line 854 because the subject is Jupiter, and the first main verb is demisit, which means sent down. So Jupiter sent down unam harum, that means one of these, and they're both feminine because we're talking about the feminine dirai, the dread ones. So Jupiter sent down one of these quickly, celerem, that's an adjective agreeing with unam. So Jupiter sent down one of these quick or quickly, ab aethere summo, from very high heaven, ab summo aethere, or from the top of heaven, something like that. It doesn't sound very natural in English to talk about the top of heaven, so I just said from high heaven in my translation. And que, he ordered yusit, and we have to imagine unam again as the subject, so he ordered her to meet, occurrere. Occurrere means to go to meet someone, and it takes dative. So he ordered her to go to meet, and our dative is juturna, in omen. Now this is in plus accusative, but not with the usual meaning into. Here this is in, suggesting a purpose or intended result. So in omen here means to serve as an omen, or I put in my translation as a sign. And then illa volat, she flies, and que, she is carried, fertur, present passive, she is carried to earth, ad terram, by, so here we have ablative, by a celeri turbine, by a quick whirlwind, something like that. And then here we have non secus ac. Now this is a phrase in Latin which introduces a simile, because it literally means not otherwise than, not differently than. So non means not, secus means otherwise or differently. So not differently from, or just like, an arrow, sagitta, having been shot, that's a PPP, impulsa, PPP from impellere, having been shot, nervo, from a bowstring. In prose you'd probably have here, nervo, from a bowstring, but here it's just the ablative on its own, from a bowstring, per nubem, through a cloud. And then we have here armatam, another PPP, and here it's accusative because it's now become the object. And you can see that with quam as well. So quam literally means which. Then armed with the felle, that means with the bile, with the destruction or something like that. Felle is the ablative of a quite unusual Latin noun, fel, F-E-L. So with the bile, with the destruction of saevi veneni, of savage poison. Okay, so an arrow which, quam, armed with the bile of savage poison. A Parthian, and now here's our subject, a Parthian has torsit, has shot. So that's how the grammar works. So we've got a sagitta here, so the fury, or sorry, the dira is just like an arrow. And then now the arrow is in the accusative because it's the object of the Parthian shooting, right? So an arrow which, armed with the fell, with the destruction, with the bile of savage poison, a Parthian has shot. And Virgil then qualifies that word Parthos. He says, well, a Parthian, Parthos, or a Sidonian, Parthos cives kaidon, so sive means or, and a Sidonian is basically a way of saying a Cretan, someone from the island of Crete. So a Parthian or a Cretan, a Parthian or a Sidonian. And then the arrow is described as a telum immedicabile. That literally means a weapon that is unmedicinable, unhealable, right? So I translated immedicabile as fatal. You could say deadly, a deadly weapon. Okay, and et stridens, this is still referring to the arrow, stridens, hissing, present participle, hissing, it leaps across, transilit, it leaps across, unseen, incognita, okay, and this is incognita feminine because it's still referring to the arrow, unseen, it leaps across the celeris umbras. Now in prose, celeris would be celeres, so it's accusative plural. It leaps across or leaps through the quick shadows. So in other words, this dira is moving like an arrow that's going to kill someone. That's the basic idea. Okay, so now we go on to the next page. Talis. Talis means of such a kind. So I just translated that as so in my version. So of such a kind, in this way, so the sata. Now sata literally means born from. So the sata nocte means the woman born from night. So therefore the daughter of night. Tulit say, carried herself, i.e. moved, and que petivit, sought out, or just sought, looked for the lands, terras. Okay, so in other words, that whole simile with the arrow tells us how, in what way, this daughter of night, this Dira, moved from Jupiter in heaven down to earth. And then postquam, which means after, or in my translation I said as soon as, she sees, videt, the Achaeas Iliacas, the Ilian battle lines, i.e. the Trojan battle lines, and the Agmina Turni, and the, literally again, the battle lines of Turnus, although I said the army of Turnus, just to capture that variation of Achaeas and Agmina in the Latin, I decided to use two different words in English as well. So I said the army of Turnus. And then you get quite a difficult phrase here. So after she sees all the soldiers, basically, collecta literally that means having collected herself, having contracted herself, made herself smaller. Right, so having contracted herself, literally in subitam figuram, into the sudden shape of a parvae alitis, of a small bird. Now in English we wouldn't say having shrunk into the sudden shape, we would say suddenly having shrunk into the shape. So we would use something like subito in English. We would say suddenly as an adverb, rather than having subitam as an adjective agreeing with figuram. It's just a different way of expressing the same thing. You could replace subitam with subito and get the same meaning. And this small bird, by the way, is not specified, but probably Virgil is referring to an owl. Okay, so having sort of contracted herself, shrunk into the sudden figure of a small bird. So parvae alitis is genitive, of a small bird. Quae, which, so this is referring to the bird, a bird which, quondam, that means, sometimes that means once upon a time, but here it means sometimes or on occasion, which sometimes, sitting at night, sedens nocte, sitting at night, in bustis, on tombs, or out on culminibus desertis, on deserted roofs. And then what does it do while it's sitting? It canet, it sings. It sings importuna, ill-omened things, unlucky things, things that predict disaster. It sings ill-omened things. I said in my translation, it's ill-omened song. Serum, that means late at night, just late. Through the shadows, per umbras. I said among the shadows in my translation. Okay, so this dira is just like a small bird, probably an owl, that is doing all this stuff. And then Virgil, after this dash here, this punctuation mark, Virgil moves back into the main narrative. Okay, so versa, having turned into this appearance, in hanc faciem, having turned into this shape, this form, this appearance, the pestis, the fiend, fet refet, literally that means carries and recarries itself. Carries and recarries itself. So I said in English, flew and flew again. Ob ora turni. Ob here means against, something like that. It can mean because of, but here it means against the face of Turnus. Ora turni. Remember, os oris means a face, and sometimes, as here, it's plural for no particular reason, apart from just to fit the meter. So against, so flew and flew again against the face of Turnus, and que sonans. That means that's a participle, making a noise, something like that. It everberat. That means it keeps beating. Right, the letter e there is what's called an intensive prefix. So instead of just it's beating, it's the idea is it keeps on beating. Turnus's clipeum, his shield, with its wings, alis. So that's an ablative plural, alis, with its wings. Okay. And then you get a novus torpor, a strange numbness. Now, novus could also just mean another numbness, but it could mean, as I've translated it, strange or unfamiliar, a strange feeling of numbness. That's a feeling where you can't really feel your limbs, that kind of thing. A strange numbness. Solvit, that means sort of literally loosened or slackened. Turnus's membra, his limbs, with dread, formidine, ablative singular of formido, with dread. And que, his commi, his hairs, or you could just say his hair, arectai sunt, you have to imagine sunt, arectai sunt, stood on end, or stood up, in terror, horrore, or you could say in horror, and et, his voice, vox, haesit, remember this word haireo, it means to stick to or cling to. It's where we get the word adhesive in English. His voice stuck to, clung to his faucibus. This is a plural noun, fauces, which means his throat. And here you have haireo plus ablative, to stick with something, to stick to something. So his voice stuck in his throat. Okay, and I think that's the end of this passage.